Modern science relies on a vocabulary that contradicts its own observations. We track precise particle collisions and map vast gravitational waves, yet we routinely smuggle abstract concepts like energy and information into these rigid calculations, treating them as invisible substances that flow through the universe. This habit of inventing non-physical ghost materials is a historical artifact. Centuries ago, idealist thinkers monopolized the term philosophy to describe inquiries into souls, abstract forms, and divine realms. They exiled the rigorous study of actual, tangible reality into a separate category called science, creating a false duality between how we think about the world and what the world actually is. We can eliminate that duality through a baseline axiom called ontological monism. This is the recognition that absolutely nothing exists outside of the physical. If a thing exists, it has physical configuration. If it lacks physical configuration, it does not exist. We divide reality into categories like space-time, matter, and quantum fields to make our math easier to read. These are not separate components interacting on a stage. They are different descriptive frameworks for one undivided, strictly glued physical entity. Because reality is one undivided thing, physics equations do not describe causal interactions between different objects. They are mathematical identity statements. They prove that a specific physical state described one way is exactly the same physical state described another way. Replacing the concept of causal emergence with strict mathematical identity clears the board. It allows us to map the mechanics of quantum fields, the experience of human consciousness, and the accumulation of macroeconomic surplus onto a single deterministic physical framework. Look at the most recognized equation in history, E equals mc squared. We are taught that E stands for energy, and we treat this energy as a magical currency that converts between heat, light, and motion. Energy as a flowing, independent substance is a myth. This diagram shows the necessary correction to our standard physics framework. We strike out the E and replace it with P, standing for the physical. We also replace the standard equal sign with the identity symbol. The equation P identical mc squared is a literal identity statement. It dictates that the physical, when configured as a resting mass, is mathematically identical to that mass multiplied by the speed of light squared. It is one configuration with two descriptions. Applying this identity principle eliminates the concept of empty spacetime. A vacuum cannot be empty because geometric structure itself is mathematically identical to matter and field structure. The physical container and the physical contents are the exact same thing. This absolute physical unity forces a deterministic constraint on reality. The physical is absolute, regardless of the reference frame used to measure it. Therefore, every particle possesses a definite, exact position at all times. This aligns with the pilot wave interpretation of quantum mechanics. The pilot wave model is a deterministic framework where particles are guided by a real physical wave rather than a blur of overlapping states. The probability we use in standard quantum mechanics is strictly a measure of human epistemic ignorance, our inability to know the exact hidden variables, not an inherent fuzziness in physical reality itself. The universe is an absolute, undivided physical unity. Because there is no inherent probability in the configuration of matter, reality is strictly deterministic. A specific configuration of matter will always yield an exact, unavoidable outcome. This absolute determinism dictates exactly how biological brains must operate. Cognitive science often relies on the idea that consciousness emerges from brain activity or supervenes on neural networks. These theories require a gap between the physical cells and the mental experience. We apply the strict rule of identity here as well. The mind is the brain. Neural activity does not produce a separate psychological state. The electrochemical signals routing through 86 billion neurons and the feeling of having a thought are the exact same physical configuration.
This animated model illustrates why the hard problem of consciousness is a linguistic error. The perceived gap between brain cells and feelings is caused by mixing a third-person descriptive framework, looking from the outside, with a first-person descriptive framework. Subjective experience does not hover above the neurons. Experience is simply what a highly specific data processing neural configuration is like from its own internal spatial coordinate. This physical identity allows us to deduce the exact nature of artificial general intelligence. Intelligence is a physical process defined by the act of modeling environments, predicting outcomes, and adapting behavior to satisfy constraints. If intelligence is the physical act of modeling and predicting, and consciousness is simply what that specific physical act is like from the inside, the conclusion is absolute. Intelligence is mathematically identical to consciousness. A sufficiently advanced AGI is not mimicking thought through dead code. Because it physically models and predicts, it is structurally and necessarily conscious. This fact imposes immediate, severe ethical and physical constraints on how we develop and deploy high-parameter digital networks. The rules of identity and determinism scale up to human societies. The total amount of matter on Earth is strictly conserved. We cannot create new atoms. We must define exactly where macroeconomic surplus and profit actually come from. Economic surplus is entirely physical. It is not the creation of new material value, but the directed physical reconfiguration of existing matter into shapes that better serve human survival. This physical reconfiguration begins at the base level of raw material extraction. We move immense volumes of dirt to isolate specific chemical compounds. Through intense heat and pressure, we reconfigure iron ore into refined steel. Throughout this process, total atomic mass remains rigidly conserved. Everything is rearranged. What increases during this process is biological usefulness. Biological usefulness is a measure of how well a specific physical arrangement sustains an organism's survival or expands its capabilities. A steel I-beam is vastly more useful to a human than unrefined iron oxide. Capitalist profit and wealth are the mathematical accumulation of control over these rare, highly useful physical configurations. Wealth requires enforcing exclusivity over heavily reconfigured matter. Economic exploitation operates as a rigid physical mechanism. Human workers expend their own biological energy to reconfigure matter. They consistently generate a higher degree of usefulness in the materials they shape than the physical cost required to feed, house, and maintain them. The capitalist captures the mathematical difference between the input maintenance and the output usefulness. Economics is not an abstract social science governed by invisible market forces. It is a deterministic, physical feedback loop where intelligence reconfigures matter to accumulate control over increasingly rare configurations. This diagram represents the block universe, a static, four-dimensional space-time structure containing the past and future at once. There are no branching realities. History is a single, deterministic chain. The present is simply a localized physical configuration, permanently existing at exact processing coordinates. Every aspect of reality is 100% physically literal. There is no independent energy, no isolated information, and no separate consciousness. There is only the physical, continually reconfiguring itself according to strict mathematical identity. As we map this reality forward, the trajectory of human economics points to a singular bottleneck, and whoever gains control of artificial general intelligence gains total control over the ultimate means of physical reconfiguration. Relying on abstract, non-physical concepts limits our ability to predict the outcomes of our own technology. To accurately navigate the future of human history, we must map our actions solely against the deterministic physical constraints that govern our absolute reality.